We're just going to do a quick overview of thermal emergencies, so hyper and hypothermia. All right, we'll start off with hyperthermia. So hyperthermia, folks get too hot. It's pretty common. More common in the summer months, more common in places with warmer climates. So think the Southwest, Southeast. Don't have to be a climate believer to know that we are having hotter days. Ask anybody who lives in Phoenix where they're setting like record highs every summer these days. Consequently, hotter days mean more hyperthermic emergencies, right? So from 1999 to 2023, number of people who died, 1,100 to 2,300. Number went even higher in 2024. Pretty common reason for folks to go to the ER, especially again in the summer months. And in the workplace, pretty common, 33,000 work-related heat injuries per year. And of those, 33 die from work-related heat illnesses. Structural firefighting is no exception to that rule, right? So you're packed up, you're turned out, you're in a hot environment, you're working hard. It is sort of the perfect environment for exertional hyperthermia. So 74% of firefighters experience some sort of hyperthermic related symptoms and injury at some point in their career. 5% report symptoms 20 plus times per year, according to the NFPA. So I don't know where those people are working or what it is they're doing, but that seems kind of excessive. I don't know. Maybe every time they get a cramp, they count that. I don't know. But it is a perfect sort of mixture of ingredients to start raising your core temp, start getting your temp up, have some hyperthermic emergencies. So it's something we need to keep in mind, not just when we're helping the citizens, but also helping each other and taking care of our own people at structure fires, at live fire training, stuff like that. I'm sorry if you're a metric hater, all the treatment guidelines are written in Celsius. I threw in some conversions where I remembered, but if you're a true metric hater, I apologize in advance, it's not my fault. Hyperthermia, specifically when we start talking about heat stroke, we really define that as a body temperature greater than 104. We are, remember, mainly talking about exertional hyperthermia, right? So my body temperature is getting raised by outside factors. This is very different than when, say, I spike a fever, right? Because that's different when my body resets its own set point. So the hypothalamus is the part of your brain that actually controls your temperature and helps you regulate your temperature. So when you get sick, you get a virus, say this time of year you catch the flu, your chemicals get released in your body when it attaches to the flu virus, says, hey, we got an invader here, your hypothalamus gets those, and it readjusts your body's temperature set point in an effort to make you a less happy host for that virus, right? It's your way of fighting infection. That is a very different scenario than when I'm working hard in a hot environment and outside factors are raising my temperature, right? That's why you don't have people with a temp of 104 fever walking around like heat stroked, right? So we're talking about kind of two very different scenarios there. Heat-related illness is sort of a spectrum of illness, right? We get everything from heat cramps, which is really honestly more of a fluid issue. Those folks have sweated out about 20 to 30% of their fluid, and because of those fluid and electrolyte shifts, that's actually what creates heat cramps. Those folks really don't have much of a rise in their core body temperature. They may be 99 to 100, no significant increase. Then you start, it's really more fluid related. Then you start moving into the realm of heat exhaustion. And those are the folks who feel tachycardic. They may be getting a little dizzy, diaphoretic, although towards the end they'll kind of stop sweating. They'll get tachypnic, they start to feel pretty crummy. And those are folks who are in sort of the 99 to 104 range. So they got a kind of a modest rise in their body temperature, core temperature, and they start getting those symptoms. And then once you hit 104 and beyond, that's when you start moving into the realm of heat stroke, which we characterize as when you develop the neurologic symptoms, right? And that's where heat stroke gets its name from, is because of those neurologic symptoms. These folks legit look like they have stroked out sometimes. If you've ever seen really serious actual significant heat stroke. I mean, these folks are dizzy, they're ataxic, they don't know where they are, what's going on, their speech is off. I mean, they really look like they've had a stroke. And so that's where the name comes from. And those are folks, once you start crossing over 104 is generally where you find folks will get neurologic symptoms and move into that realm of heat stroke as they start to sort of overcome those cooling mechanisms. For every minute or degree that you go up over 104, things get progressively worse. So our goal is to get you out of that environment as quickly as we can, because as the body continues to heat past 104, a lot of things start to break down. You have metabolic processes that really like to function in a very narrow range around 98.6. Everything from your ability to break down sugar for energy to clot all occur in a very narrow temperature range. And so once you get above 104, a lot of those things, and really especially in the 105, 106 range, those things really start to break down. And in fact, once you start hitting 106, proteins start to unravel, a lot of bad things start to happen that eventually end up leading you to have multi-organ system failure, and that's what kills folks from hyperthermia. Again, remember, we're talking about exertional hyperthermia mainly. There are two types: exertional, which is sort of what we're talking about with structural firefighting athletes. You know, it's September game in Alabama where it's still 100 degrees outside and folks are in pads outside playing football. Or there's also non-exertional heat stroke. And that's really more, think the little old lady who AC is broken on and then we have a streak of really hot days, right? And she's living in a hot house. We tend to not see heat stroke as much in those folks as heat exhaustion. Most of the time when we think heat stroke is usually more exertional, and those are the folks we're really kind of focusing on. Checking a temp on these folks. The best way to truly get a core temp, honestly, is a rectal temp if we can. We can sometimes surrogate oral for that a little bit, but for sure the little axillary temps or the little point and shoot kind of thermometers, they're really not helpful at all. If I pull you out of a hot building, I rip open your turnout coat and I point and shoot a thermometer, I'm really getting a measurement of the air between your coat and your skin, not a core temp on you, right? In the extremes of temperature, point and shoots and any sort of skin device that gets temperature gets really, really inaccurate. In the hospital, you can put Foley casts in and measure bladder temps. In the field, you can use either rectal temps or they make little rectal probes you can put in. They're like little flexible Foley cath looking things. They go in a few centimeters and you can monitor a core temp that way. But if we can get a rectal temp, that's great. If not, we will substitute oral for that. The point is just don't try and get like a tympanic membrane temp or some skin swipe across the forehead temp. You're getting nowhere near what their core temp is. Again, the goal is to get you out of that environment. For every degree you go up while you're in there, things get progressively worse. So we want to get you out and we want to get you cooled down as quickly as we can. And in fact, a lot of studies have shown if I can cool you within 30 minutes, I completely tank your risk of having long-term neurologic disabilities and even dying. So if I can cool you within 30 minutes, it goes a lot better for everybody. Consequently, that sort of led to this cool first, sort of transport second mentality, where we really focus on getting you cooled on site if we've got the equipment, doing what we need to cool you down in an effort to try and decrease your risk of dying and having bad long-term consequences. And so we really, kind of like we do with codes, where we work you on scene a little bit before we transport you, sort of the same thing really extrapolates to hyperthermia because of the dramatic improvement in outcomes by cooling you quickly. Because assuming we get the call, a couple minutes for someone to call 911, 5 or 6 minutes for us to get there, 15, 20-minute ride to the hospital, we're pushing that 30-minute window even under the best of conditions. So it's really better to do it on scene, start getting them cooled down. Really, mostly we're talking about ice water immersion or cold water immersion to get these folks cool. If we don't have cold water immersion available, or maybe this is somebody more in the heat exhaustion realm where we're not going to dunk them, then we've got sort of some of these other methods up here. These are some of the semi-active to passive methods that we sometimes use if we don't have cooling equipment available. So we can give you some cool saline. Obviously, we can pack some ice packs around you, right? So neck, groin, back, axilla, sort of those strategic places that we think of. We can put some cold or wet sheets or towels or cooling blankets on you. We can sit there and spray you down with a fan running over you for evaporative heat loss. These are all some of the things that we can do to kind of cool you off. For us, it's normally cool saline, ice packs, and some cold, wet blankets, cooling blankets type thing. In order to try and do it. That's usually our most common semi-active to passive methods. that we utilize. But cold water immersion really is the most effective form of treatment. If I can immerse you for true heat stroke with neurologic symptoms, if I can immerse you within 30 minutes, your outcomes are significantly better. And the recommended rate of cooling is about 0.15 degrees C per minute. Don't ask me to convert that in my head. But then we stop when you get to around 38.6, which is a little 99.5. It's like just shy of 100. And the reason is you will continue, once I take you out of the ice water, you will continue to cool for a little while. And I don't want to swing you into hypothermia, because if I swing you from hyper to hypo rapidly, I create my own set of problems, right? And that's generally not our goal. So we pull you out a little bit early, knowing that your temp will continue to change once I pull you out, kind of like taking a brisket off the smoker, right? That temp's going to go up a little bit before it starts to level. That's why I rest my brisket. Right, so same idea with a person that you've cooled. Anyway, that whole treat for or cool first, transport second mentality really is important. It really does improve outcomes. So that's why in 2018, the National Association of EMS Physicians released their consensus treatment recommendations for EMS for exertional hyperthermia or exertional heat stroke in the field. And you can see that algorithm here. It's pretty simple. Did they go down in a warm environment and they're hyperthermic? Yes. Check their responsiveness. And really responsiveness is just kind of an ABC check, right? That's really, they put responsiveness in there, but it's really an ABC check. Are you responsive enough to maintain your airway? Do you have a pulse? You've not arrested and I don't need to protect your airway kind of deal, right? And then assess their CNS function. Do they have neurologic symptoms? Check their vitals with a temp, greater than 40.5, we immerse you. And then 38.5, we pull you out, or less than 38.6 as they put it. And then we go ahead and transport you. And you can see a couple spots along the way where you sort of kick out of the algorithm. But the idea is, again, check them out. If I've got an ABC problem, now I'm in more of an ACLS problem, right? I'm going to try and cool you while I'm doing things, but cooling you is no longer the number one priority. I need to support ABC, right? So ABC check, do we have neurologic symptoms? Are we hot? You get dunked. And we're going to cool you off and get you and try and improve that outcome. So there's a couple different products people use out there. Some of them have the steel tubs. A lot of places, especially the high schools and a lot of the places, are starting to use these. There's a few fire departments around here that have started buying these and having them around for like structure fires and live fire training even. This is called the Polar Life Pod, and the reason people like it is it basically collapses down and folds up into this like little carrying case, so it's easy to cart from like the soccer field to the football field, back to the training facility. So a lot of the schools have these little pods like this now. Some of them do still have the big steel tubs full of ice water. You can do this either way, but these tend to be a lot more convenient, which is why they're coming popular. They're also not super expensive, like $700. But it rolls up into that. You unzip it, roll it out. You got some arm ports, so you can have an arm out to like have an IV run in with some fluids, have some EKG leads on their arms, right? I mean, it's not going to be a perfect EKG, but it'll let me know are they in VTAC or not, right? I can get basic arrhythmia information. If you're monitoring rectal temps, it has a rectal temp probe kind of down there that's waterproof. They're pretty slick. You can fit somebody who's up to like 6'8" and like 700 pounds into these things. Like, they're pretty big. Consequently though, it does look a little bit like a body bag, which I guess is a little disturbing, but other than that, this is how they work. You roll them out, you put the person in it in case we run into these, like at a football game or something. You then just fill it with ice water until they're immersed. You zip them up in there. It's got a little hood, and then you can see over here, they've got like an IV in this guy. They're kind of monitoring like his heart rate. They've got an IV going, stuff like that. And then once you get 38.6, out you come. So this is the 11th edition protocols. This is for hyperthermia. Largely mirrors a lot of what we have already sort of talked about. If they're seizing, treat that. That can happen. But assuming we get to them before then, when they've just got neurologic symptoms like most folks will. We start cooling them. If we've got cooling stuff available for immersion on scene, go ahead and do it. Unless obviously we have an ABC problem, then we need to treat that. monitor, access fluid bolus. A lot of these people are pretty hypovolemic and can be pretty shocky, right? They've sweated out a large majority of their body fluid. And so these folks can be relatively hypovolemic just from volume contraction, from fluid loss from the sweating. So they can present a little shocky. They're gonna need some fluid probably. 500 may start the gig, but most of these folks end up getting like 3-4+ liters of fluid before they're truly adequately resuscitated. So be pretty aggressive with fluid resuscitation as well, because again, a lot of these folks will be a little shocky with their vitals, just again, from relative hypovolemia from all that volume contraction. Hypothermia, so we'll flip to the other side. So hypothermia is defined as a temp below 35 degrees C, which is 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Obviously, again, much like hyperthermia being common in warmer areas during the summer, hypothermia more common in colder areas during the winter. So think New England, Great Lakes states, upper Midwest, where it gets to like minus 10 degrees sometimes in the winter. Much more common in those places. We have a few cold days here where we'll occasionally get some mildly hypothermic folks, but it tends to be less of a problem for us than hyperthermia. But again, the hypothalamus regulates your body temperature, like we talked about before. When it senses you are cold, it does a lot of things to try and help you. First of all, it raises your basal metabolic rate to create some heat. It'll cause you to start shivering, and shivering actually will raise your metabolism about 2 to 5 times its normal basal rate, so that'll produce a little bit of heat to help you out. It also releases like catecholamines and adrenal hormones activate, stuff to cause like vasoconstriction in order to shunt blood to try and keep the heat you've got. And so a lot of things sort of happen, the hypothalamus does to try and help keep you warm. Eventually, those mechanisms can get overwhelmed though, and you continue to get cold. And about 700 to 1,500 people die of hypothermia in our country every year. Men are 10 times more likely to be affected by severe hypothermia than women are. We're probably the ones dumb enough to be like, I'm gonna hike to the store and get a 6-pack. Whereas women are like, I'm gonna stay home under a blanket in the heat with a candle. But anyway, we are dumb and get cold. And even once you get into the moderate to severe hypothermia category, which is under 90 degrees Fahrenheit, it's a coin flip on how you do. Once you get into the severe, which is under 85, it's less than a coin flip. It turns out once you get cold enough, it's just really hard to bring people back from that. And things like age, being malnourished, obviously can affect your body's ability to stay warm, which will make you more likely to get hypothermic. How do you get hypothermic? There are 4 mechanisms by which we lose heat. One is radiation. So that is just me standing here in the environment. I am radiating some heat off because of my metabolism, right? That's why thermal imaging cameras work. I pick up on the radiant heat from a person. Conduction is the other big one. So that is heat that gets conducted into a cold surface I'm in contact with. So if I lay down on the cold concrete floor, some of my heat is going to radiate into that. Especially that becomes true in hypothermia folks in water, right? So if I'm in a cold, icy lake, I am conducting heat out into the cold, icy water, right? So this is folks who get pulled out of like, the icy Lake Superior in the middle of winter. This is what made them hypothermic mostly. Loss by convection, that's air molecules moving over me and cooling me. So if I'm outside in the cold blizzard and the wind is blowing, I'm losing a lot of heat that way. And then evaporative heat loss can come from any fluid that comes in contact with the skin and evaporates. We think of it mostly with like sweating. But if I am also outside trudging through the snow and I'm wet from head to toe from snow, I'm losing some heat that way, right? So usually when we see folks with hypothermia, it's a mixture of convection and conduction, right? They got into some cold water, they're in a cold snow, they're got conductive heat loss, the wind is blowing, which is convective. So normally it's a little bit of a mixture of the two. And again, your hypothalamus really does increase your metabolic rate and tries to help you. Eventually that gets overwhelmed. As that gets overwhelmed, your metabolism starts to slow and continues to slow. A lot of those metabolic processes that we talked about like to happen in an air temperature margin. Same thing is true on the other side. They start to break down, not happen. You quit breaking down glucose for energy. Things start to go really sideways. The thing that it has affected very significantly, though, is electrical conduction. If you ask anybody who does like electrical engineering or works with electricity and like power lines, cold slows conduction of electricity significantly. Does great in heat. Heat doesn't bother electricity, but it hates to be cold. And so these folks are really prone to cardiac arrhythmias because of once they cool enough, the electrical conduction in the heart starts to be infected. Usually you will just see bradycardia from their slowing of their metabolism, but they're actually also really prone to ventricular arrhythmias. Again, as with hyperthermia, the true best way to get a core temp is really a rectal temp if available. If I pull you out of cold, icy Lake Superior Lake in the middle of winter and I point and shoot a skin thermometer at you, I'm really just getting whatever the temperature of the lake was, right? I am not getting your true core temp. So if available, it is the preferred way to try and get a temp on these folks. Mild hypothermia, 32 to 35, which is 90 to 95, moderate, 82 to 90, and then profound or severe is below 85 to 82. So you can see up there, obviously, once we get moderate and severe, again, kind of a coin flip how you do. Once you get into that severe category, for sure, once you get under below 80 to 82, things get a little dicey. It's just hard to bring somebody back from being that cool. Some of the things that affect what we do with these folks when we're assessing them and taking care of them, one is we got to be very careful about moving them. Bumping them into things, jostling them a lot can precipitate ventricular arrhythmias because of that angry electrical conduction. So we got to be really careful and gentle with moving them. The other thing is if they're unresponsive and we're checking for pulse and respirations, trying to figure out if we're in a code scenario, we have to assess that for a full 60 seconds. We generally are mostly used to kind of 10 to 15 second checks, maybe 30 if we're just out of EMT school and we're trying to play it by the book. But in general, we're used to about 10 to 15 second checks. But these folks will slow their pulse rate down, sometimes into the teens even. So, that's going to take a full 60 seconds to really feel and find that pulse. So you really do have to do a full 60 seconds checking for pulse and respirations. Obviously, that means as these people, if they're that low, a lot of these folks need a lot of airway and ventilatory support. A lot of them are going to need bagged and protected their airway. And then again, bradycardia, very common, but with ventricular arrhythmias as well, very prone to it, especially once you start jostling and moving them around. So really important to get an EKG and put these people on a monitor to keep an eye on that heart. Much like with hypothermia, we want to warm you up. And the quicker I can get you out of that environment and start warming you, the better things go. The goal is about 0.5 to 2 degrees C per hour to get you rewarmed. And the biggest thing that we can do for folks generally is get them out of wet clothes. If they've been in the lake or they've been in a snowy environment, whatever, get them out of their wet clothes and then start warming them up. We've got a few methods for how we can rewarm people. Obviously, we can put like hot air blowers on you. We can crank the heat in the back of the ambulance. I can put hot packs in those kind of key places we talked about, neck, axilla, back, groin. And then the biggest thing we do a lot of times is warm blankets. Or if you watch any movie that involves fire EMS ever, you get the little foil blanket that I've never seen in real life, but is in every movie ever made when the paramedics show up or the fire department. But yeah, warm blankets and heat packs and cranking the heat in whatever environment they're in, the ambulance, wherever. That's generally the most treatment we do. When these folks get to the hospital, you can get pretty invasive with this. You can put Foley caths in, peritoneal catheters and chest tubes, and like literally lavage hot saline through their bladder and all their body cavities. You can ECMO cannulate them and actually externally rewarm their blood on an ECMO circuit. It can get pretty invasive in the hospital for these severely hypothermic folks. For us, the other thing we do mostly, in addition to things we talked about that are kind of passive methods, the more active thing we do is warmed IV fluids, right? So warmed IV fluids is a key one, and that's sort of a more active rewarming, right? Because I'm putting warmed fluid into you. We're obviously not putting chest tubes in people, but warmed IV fluids is active rewarming, and that's sort of once we think about like hot air movers, hot blankets, heat packs, next thing we think about for us is really warmed IV fluids, right? And then as far as management and treatment for these folks, in addition to the things we talked about, There's sort of, especially in a cardiac arrest scenario, there are two things that are a little different. One, we only shock these people 3 times and then we stop. Again, electricity and cold do not get along. And it turns out the heart is just not very receptive to being shocked when it's cold. And obviously, if we shock people every 3 to 5 minutes and it takes me 2 hours to warm you up, that's a lot of electricity that heart is getting. And it turns out it doesn't go so great. So we do 3 shocks. Some people will even advocate for only 1 and done, but 3 and then stop. And then we don't shock them again until they get rewarmed. So we don't want to just keep shocking these folks, which is generally what we're sort of more used to. The other thing is we really have gotten more into the mode of not transporting arrests that we haven't gotten ROSCON. And that is not the case for these folks. It turns out when your metabolism slows enough, it's actually a little protective against all the bad things that happen when you're hypoxic and not getting blood flow. And there are reports and studies of people having good outcomes, even 3-4 hours of downtime. So unlike, there's an adage in medicine, no one's dead until they're warm and dead. That is sort of the case for these folks. Now, obviously, if your core temp is, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, you're just done and not coming back from that, right? But in general, somebody who's in the I'm still viable range, even if they're a code, we still transport those folks. We work them on scene, do our part, and then we still transport them because they can have pretty good outcomes despite prolonged downtimes.
What was the theory? I remember, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, that was real.
Therapeutic hypothermia.
Yeah, so like, hey, you get full arrest, let's try
Yeah,
to
you
free-
put them on like cold blankets, and turns out it doesn't work very well. There is a subset of people, because of whatever reason they arrested, that it is beneficial, but it's a very small minority of people. And as it turns out, when you compared the people who got chilled, meaning like down to like 32 degrees Celsius, because all those treatment guidelines were written in Celsius. Don't try and ask me to convert it in my head. When you compare the people who were chilled to the people who were in the like chilled to normal range, the outcomes were about the same. It's the folks who get out of normal, who get a little hypothermic, who get febrile post-arrest, they're the folks who have worse outcomes. So now the goal is we don't do therapeutic hypothermia, we do what's called targeted temperature management. And that is just keeping you normal and not febrile. And a lot of times that does involve basically a lot of the same equipment of the like cold cooling blankets and stuff like that post-arrest. But it's no longer therapeutic hypothermia. It's targeted temperature management with the idea of just keeping you from getting febrile and hyperthermic. And those folks do have better outcomes than the folks who get warm. So this is the hypothermia protocol from the 11th edition. It obviously mirrors a lot of what we just talked about. Get them out of their wet clothes. Obviously, we already talked about some of these folks are going to need some airway and ventilation support. Cardiac monitor we talked about. Glucometer. A lot of these folks, by the time they're pretty hypothermic, they've been in the elements for a while, right? There's the 5 skiers, how they're still missing in Lake Tahoe right now after the avalanche. If they find those folks today, there's a high probability after being in the cold for a day or two, they are going to be hypoglycemic. So checking a blood sugar, IV access, warmed IV fluids, and warm them up. So all the things we sort of talked about, this largely mirrors.